What if a single, throwaway comparison became Exhibit A against you? One dinner joke about who the kids resemble ended with a lab report and divorce papers. My name is Ophelia Sterling, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm downtown, and until recently, I thought I had everything under control. I had Julian, my software engineer husband, who provided stability and security. I had our two beautiful daughters, 8-year-old Sophie and 4-year-old Maya. And I had Dante, my connection to the person I used to be before I became just another suburban wife, drowning in routine and expectations. People love to judge women like me. They see the affair and immediately decide we're monsters who destroy families for selfish reasons. But they don't see the years of emotional neglect, the way Julian treated me more like a household manager than a partner, or how he made me feel invisible in my own life. They don't understand that sometimes you have to choose between slowly dying inside or finding a way to feel alive again. Dante wasn't just some random guy I threw my marriage away for. He was my college boyfriend, the man who knew me before I became this version of myself that everyone expected me to be grateful for. When we reconnected 3 years ago, it wasn't about destroying my family. It was about remembering who I was underneath all the responsibilities and compromises that marriage had piled onto me. Julian thinks he's some kind of hero in this story, methodically building his case against me like I was a criminal instead of his wife who had been crying out for attention and connection for years. He documented everything with the cold precision he brought to his programming work, never once stopping to ask why his wife might have needed to look elsewhere for the emotional intimacy he couldn't provide. The truth is, I tried to make our marriage work for 8 years. I tried to be satisfied with Julian's steady reliability and predictable affection. I tried to convince myself that a man who remembered to take out the trash and split the bills fairly was enough. But there's a difference between being a good roommate and being a husband who actually sees and values his wife as a complete person. When Maya was born 4 years ago, I was already feeling disconnected from Julian and our life together. He was present but not really there, going through the motions of being a husband and father without any real passion or engagement. Dante represented everything Julian wasn't: spontaneous, emotionally available, interested in me as more than just the woman who handled household logistics. I know what you're thinking. You're already deciding that I'm just another cheating wife making excuses for my behavior. But I need you to understand the full picture before you judge me. This isn't a story about a woman who thoughtlessly destroyed her family. This is about a woman who fought to preserve some part of herself while everyone around her demanded she disappear into the role they needed her to play. What happened over the next few months wasn't me being cruel or manipulative. It was me trying to protect the life I had built while also honoring the connection that made me feel human again. Julian forced this confrontation with his paranoia and controlling behavior. All I did was refuse to let him intimidate me into giving up the one relationship that made me feel valued and understood. The problem started showing up in small ways that Julian should have ignored, but he never could let anything go. That Tuesday evening when he came home from work, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, while Maya played with her dolls nearby. Julian hung up his jacket and immediately started studying Maya's face, like he was solving some complicated puzzle at work. He commented on how different Maya looked from Sophie at that age, pointing out her darker hair and brown eyes compared to Sophie's lighter features. I told him children change constantly, and he was being paranoid about nothing. I reminded him how exhausted he had been when Maya was conceived, working those ridiculous overtime hours, suggesting maybe his memory wasn't as reliable as he thought it was. When Julian kept pushing the subject, asking if I remembered exactly when Maya was conceived, I grew irritated with his suspicious tone. I accused him of being controlling and paranoid, turning the conversation toward his character flaws instead of entertaining his ridiculous theories. I mentioned how Dante used to trust me completely during our relationship, letting that comparison hang in the air, where Julian would have to think about it. Sophie walked into the kitchen at that moment, and I made an observation about how she had inherited Julian's stubborn personality while Maya was more free-spirited like me. I suggested this proved that children take after different parents in different ways, and there was nothing suspicious about normal genetic variation. Julian fell quiet after that, clearly uncomfortable with the implied criticism of his personality. Throughout dinner, I could feel Julian studying both girls, comparing their features and mannerisms in ways that made me realize he was developing some kind of theory. I deflected his attention by asking about his work projects and discussing Sophie's upcoming school events, keeping the conversation focused on normal family topics instead of his paranoid observations. Maya innocently mentioned during dinner that a nice man had visited me at work recently, describing his dark hair and brown eyes in the casual way children talk about people they meet. I quickly changed the subject to dessert plans, but I noticed Julian's face had gone completely pale. He had clearly recognized the description and realized Maya was talking about Dante, the ex-boyfriend I had told him I never saw anymore. The rest of the evening felt tense and uncomfortable, with Julian asking careful questions about my work schedule and recent meetings. I maintained my innocent act, expressing confusion about his sudden interest in my daily routine and wondering aloud if he was feeling stressed about something at work. I suggested maybe he should consider talking to someone about his growing paranoia and suspicious thoughts about his own family. The situation escalated the following weekend when we went to dinner with Julian's parents at that popular restaurant downtown. Eleanor Sterling made some innocent comments about how different our girls were, and I saw the perfect opportunity to educate everyone about how genetics actually work in families. I launched into an explanation about how mysterious genetic inheritance could be, mentioning that I knew another family where the children looked nothing alike despite having the same parents. I casually referenced some details about Dante's family without naming them directly, just to add credibility to my scientific explanation. When Julian tried to change the subject, I interrupted him and pointed out that he always got uncomfortable when discussions became too intellectual for him to follow. I told his parents that Julian often felt insecure about my college education and professional success, painting myself as the patient wife dealing with an increasingly paranoid husband who couldn't handle having a smart wife. Robert Sterling tried to defend his brother, but I skillfully turned this into evidence of their family's dysfunction. I suggested that Julian's family had always been overprotective and suspicious of outsiders who didn't fit their narrow worldview. I mentioned how Dante's family had always been more welcoming and open-minded when I dated him in college. The conversation grew more uncomfortable as I continued making subtle comparisons between Julian and my ex-boyfriend. I described how some men were naturally confident and secure in themselves, while others needed constant reassurance and validation from everyone around them. Eleanor looked increasingly disturbed by what she was hearing, but I presented it all as genuine concern for Julian's emotional well-being and mental health. I could see that Julian felt completely trapped by the public setting, unable to defend himself without looking even more paranoid and controlling in front of his own family. I had effectively weaponized his parents' love for him against him, systematically demolishing his reputation while appearing to be the caring, concerned wife trying to help her troubled husband. Maya innocently mentioned during dessert that the nice man at my work had the same dark eyes as her, which caused the entire table to fall into uncomfortable silence. I quickly laughed it off and explained that children often notice random similarities between people, but I could see Eleanor and Robert exchanging worried glances. Julian excused himself to use the bathroom, but through the restaurant window I noticed him standing outside making what appeared to be a very serious phone call. His body language looked different than I had ever seen before, more determined and focused instead of his usual defeated posture. When he returned to the table, he seemed calmer but also more distant, like he had made some kind of important decision while he was outside. The rest of the dinner passed with polite conversation, but I could feel that something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamic, and Julian's unusual behavior was making me wonder what exactly he had been discussing during that mysterious phone call. Sunday dinner at my mother's house became my opportunity to secure family support, while Julian grew increasingly isolated. Victoria Morrison welcomed everyone with her usual enthusiasm, immediately taking Maya's side when she complained about Julian being grumpy and mean to Mommy lately. I launched into my well-rehearsed narrative about Julian's escalating paranoia and jealousy, describing how he had started questioning my work schedule and professional friendships. I explained that he had become suspicious of completely innocent relationships and was even making bizarre comments about our children's appearances, suggesting he might be having some kind of breakdown. Camille Morrison listened quietly as I detailed Julian's supposed emotional problems. I described how he had grown suspicious of my coworkers and was questioning perfectly normal business meetings and networking events. I painted myself as the long-suffering wife trying to hold our family together while dealing with an increasingly unstable husband who saw threats everywhere. Victoria immediately rallied to my defense, suggesting that Julian had always been too serious and analytical for his own good. She recalled how Dante had been so much more fun and spontaneous when I was younger, wondering aloud if I had maybe settled too quickly after my college relationship ended. She seemed to genuinely believe that Julian's personality flaws were the root of our marital problems. However, Camille began asking more pointed questions than I had expected. She wondered why Julian would suddenly develop these concerns after years of apparently happy marriage. She mentioned noticing how I deflected whenever specific questions came up about my work relationships or daily schedule, which caught me off guard with its accuracy. I quickly turned her observations into evidence that Julian's paranoid behavior was spreading to other family members and poisoning them against me. I suggested that his suspicious nature was so toxic, it was even affecting my relationship with my own sister, making everyone question my honesty and integrity for no reason. The afternoon grew increasingly tense as Camille continued pressing for details about my work schedule and recent changes in my behavior patterns. I responded by breaking down in tears, claiming I felt attacked and unsupported by everyone who should have been helping me through this difficult time. I said Julian's unfounded accusations were destroying my family relationships and isolating me from my support system. While helping in the kitchen later, Maya told Camille that my work friend looked just like her daddy, but not the daddy who lived at home with them. I quickly distracted Maya with a snack, but I could see Camille processing this information with growing alarm. When I looked back at my sister, her face had gone completely white as she realized what Maya was actually describing. I could practically see her putting together the timeline and physical resemblance, understanding the implications of what my 4-year-old daughter had just innocently revealed about the man who had been visiting me at work. Julian returned home that evening with a determined expression I had never seen on his face before. He sat down at our kitchen table and asked me directly about my relationship with Dante, using a tone that suggested he already knew more than he was letting on. I immediately went on the offensive, accusing him of spying on me and violating my privacy as his wife. I demanded to know what gave him the right to investigate my friendships and professional relationships like some kind of detective. I called his behavior controlling and paranoid, telling him it was becoming emotionally abusive to live with someone who questioned every aspect of my daily life. I threatened to take the children and leave if he continued harassing me about imaginary infidelities that existed only in his suspicious mind. Julian remained unusually calm throughout my emotional outburst, asking specific questions about my work, schedule, and recent business meetings. He mentioned the private phone calls I had been taking and my defensive reactions when he asked simple questions about my day. I responded by attacking his masculinity, comparing him unfavorably to more confident men who didn't need to monitor their wives constantly. The argument escalated as I accused Julian of trying to isolate me from my professional support system and sabotage my career advancement. I told him he was jealous of my success and uncomfortable with having a wife who was respected and valued by her colleagues. I mentioned how other men appreciated my intelligence and capabilities, unlike my insecure husband who saw everything as a threat. Throughout our confrontation, Julian was taking notes on his phone, documenting my responses and behavioral patterns, like he was conducting some kind of research study. When I noticed what he was doing, I became furious and accused him of building a legal case against me, like I was a criminal instead of his wife. I told him no loving husband would treat his partner like a suspect in an investigation. I used every manipulation tactic I could think of, denying his accusations, while simultaneously attacking his character and reversing our roles so that he became the aggressor and I became the victim. I threatened to take our children away from him if he continued this harassment, claiming he was creating a hostile environment that was damaging to their emotional development. Julian quietly mentioned that he had already spoken to a lawyer about protecting his parental rights, which made me realize he was completely serious about taking legal action against me. The calm way he delivered this information was more frightening than if he had been screaming and throwing things like a normal, jealous husband would do. Later that night, I found legal documents hidden in Julian's desk drawer, realizing he had been preparing for this confrontation for weeks or possibly months. The papers included consultation notes about divorce proceedings, custody arrangements, and asset protection, proving that his methodical nature had been working against me this entire time. The next morning, Julian left for what he claimed was a work meeting, but I discovered he had actually gone to meet with attorney Sarah Mitchell. He had apparently been building a comprehensive case against me for months, presenting documented evidence including phone records, work schedules, and witness statements from my colleagues who had observed my interactions with Dante. While Julian was out, I found appointment cards and consultation notes hidden throughout his desk and filing cabinet. He had been meeting with financial advisors about separating our accounts and protecting his retirement funds. There were also cards for marriage counselors and family therapists, proving he had been building a comprehensive strategy for dealing with our marital problems through official channels. When Julian returned home, he calmly informed me that we would be getting DNA tests for both children. He explained this was necessary for legal and medical reasons, presenting it as a routine procedure rather than an accusation of infidelity. My explosive reaction to this suggestion probably only reinforced whatever suspicions he had been developing. I accused him of destroying our family with his paranoid investigations and told him no child should have to endure paternity testing because of their father's insecurities and trust issues. I threatened to leave immediately and take both children with me, claiming he was creating a hostile and psychologically damaging environment for our daughters. Julian documented my threats and refusal to cooperate with the testing, explaining that he had already consulted with his lawyer about the proper legal procedures for establishing paternity in contested cases. He mentioned that my resistance to routine medical testing would be noted in any future legal proceedings, which made me realize how carefully he was building his case. The situation became even more alarming when I discovered Julian had been secretly recording our conversations for evidence purposes. I accused him of violating my privacy and betraying my trust as his wife, but he pointed out that our home was jointly owned and he had every legal right to document threats made against his family and children. I tried emotional blackmail, threatening to take the children and claiming he was being abusive by requesting paternity testing. I attempted to paint him as the aggressor for protecting his legal rights and financial assets, but Julian remained calm and methodical throughout all my emotional manipulation attempts. Eleanor Sterling learned about the situation and immediately offered to support Julian through whatever legal proceedings might be necessary. Robert provided emotional support and helped with legal research, while my own family remained divided about whether to believe my version of events or start questioning my behavior patterns. The DNA test results arrived while Julian was at work, and I briefly considered intercepting the mail before realizing that tampering with legal documents would be a federal crime. Instead, I had to wait anxiously while Julian planned to reveal the results during our next family gathering. Julian opened the DNA test envelope during Sunday dinner at our house, with both sets of grandparents present to witness whatever truth he thought he was revealing. He read the results aloud with that same methodical calm he brought to everything. Sophie was confirmed as his biological daughter, while Maya showed no genetic relationship to him whatsoever. The room fell completely silent as everyone processed what this meant. Eleanor Sterling started crying immediately, while my mother Victoria looked stunned and confused, unable to understand how this could be possible. I could see the exact moment when the reality of my deception hit each family member. I immediately began damage control, claiming the results had to be wrong and demanding we get retesting done at a different laboratory. I accused Julian of somehow manipulating the samples or bribing the testing facility to produce false results. I insisted that paternity tests were notoriously unreliable, and this was just another example of his paranoid behavior reaching dangerous new levels. Julian calmly produced additional evidence he had been gathering for months. Phone records showing constant communication with Dante, witness statements from my co-workers about our relationship, and financial records documenting unexplained expenses during our supposed business meetings. He had built what appeared to be a completely solid case proving my ongoing affair. Robert Sterling quickly calculated Dante's age and realized that Maya could indeed be his biological child based on the timeline of our relationship. Eleanor demanded to know how long I had been lying to their family about Maya's paternity, struggling to understand how she had been deceived about her own granddaughter for 4 years. I broke down completely, alternating between blaming Julian for destroying our family and claiming I had only turned to Dante because Julian was emotionally unavailable and neglectful as a husband. I said the affair had been Julian's fault for not meeting my emotional needs and forcing me to seek genuine connection and intimacy elsewhere. Julian presented the legal papers he had carefully prepared: divorce proceedings, citing adultery and fraud, a petition for full custody of Sophie based on my deception and threats to take the children, and a financial settlement that would protect his assets from someone who had committed paternity fraud for years. Eleanor offered to testify about my manipulative behavior and threats against the family. Victoria Morrison finally understood the full extent of my deception and lies, realizing how I had been playing both families against each other. Camille admitted she had suspected something was wrong, but hadn't wanted to believe her own sister was capable of such elaborate manipulation. My final attempts to blame Julian and deny the overwhelming evidence fell apart when confronted with documented proof and multiple witness testimonies. The extended family united in supporting Julian and protecting Sophie's interests, while Maya's future remained legally complicated but would be resolved through proper custody channels. Julian had successfully exposed the truth, protected his parental rights, secured his financial assets, and documented my years of manipulation and deception. The legal papers were served, and everyone finally knew exactly who I really was. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city are you watching. Ching, 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 ching.